Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions, and today's opinions will be about The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And now I'm on my fourth time trying to record just the synopsis of this one, so I will warn you, I am just going to mispronounce everything. I'm just going to try to keep trucking through this one. So The Jasmine Throne takes place in the Empire of Parijat Deepva, which, yeah, I'm mispronouncing. Specifically, we are within the kingdom of Ahiriana, which is within the Empire. And things are not going well here. There's a disease called the rot that is spreading throughout the plants and people of the kingdom. It is incurable, has like 100% fatality rate, and has hit the farmers the hardest, mainly because you get it from eating diseased plants. And because of this, because the farmers are dying and the crops are dying in the field, people are starving, and the Empire is not helping. It doesn't help that the current emperor, Chandra, is a religious zealot who wants to purify the country by burning women. Pirya, our main character, is a maidservant in the Ahiriana regent's household. She spends her time just trying to do the little things she can to help the people no one else will. Specifically, she feeds orphans and buys them the sacred wood they need to hold off the rot. And she tries to find them places. But then the emperor's sister is sent to Ahiriana as a prisoner. The princess Malini is guilty of refusing to give herself to the pyre her brother condemned her to, and was sent to languish in the temple of the old Ahiriana religion until she agrees to burn. And this is a temple where a decade ago, the last of the temple elders and the temple children were burned alive when they grew too powerful. Pirya finds herself climbing the temple again for the first time since childhood to work for the princess. Or maybe to find herself? Or maybe to reshape the country. I really liked this book, and I liked it in the simple way that allows me to think more about the themes than the language. The prose that Tasha Suri writes leans far more towards the simple and clear than the lyrical. Like, don't get me wrong, she writes some beautiful phrases, but the prose is very clearly focused on making it explicitly clear what is happening. And there's often beauty in that simplicity. There's something ecstatically beautiful to me about a sentence that just clearly states an idea that seems really simple at first glance, but carries so much more power and depth and importance because of the story it's told in. The annoying thing about these sentences is then when you try to bring them out to show people how beautiful they are, they just sound boring and simple. I run into this problem a lot myself when, like, I find agents that want your favorite line from your manuscript, because this is the kind of beautiful line I try to write, something that seems clear, simple, straightforward, but there's a depth built behind it from the context. And yeah, this book has so many moments like this. An example, this is what she had needed. Not forgiveness, not a balm for the strange writhing fury inside of her, but the promise of something to care for, to love, that she could not harm, even if she had to. Like, yeah, that's not super poetic. It's not treading new paths of lyrical structure, metaphor, or even word choice. It rolls off the tongue well enough, like it's fun and easy to read, it's smooth, but it's not Ulysses. It's just clearly stating what a character is feeling. But when you have 400 pages of context, story, emotions, and heavy themes that build up to this moment, they are very powerful words indeed. And the themes are mainly what I want to talk about with this book. There are some really interesting themes in this one. The main question this book is playing with is whether and when power turns a person into a monster. And damn is that question fully explored. Like, we're looking at every element of the question, and it's played with, and it's seen from different angles. Who is a monster? What makes a person a monster? Is it ever necessary for someone to be a monster for the greater good? Where is that line? Is one murder too far? Is murdering a child too far? How bad does bad have to be before you should allow yourself to become a monster? Is it always necessary for someone to be a bit monstrous to take power? Is it the power itself that makes someone monstrous? Or were they monstrous before they got power? Or are only the monstrous drawn to power? There's so much going on here. For example, the Temple children were clearly raised in a slightly monstrous way. They were taught to be strong by basically cutting away any weakness. They are encouraged to bully each other, to fight, and to hurt each other. They are asked to do a ritual that everyone involved knows kills a good number of those who attempt it. And we are talking about children. But this is for religious reasons. And when they survive the ritual, they walk away with more power than the adults around them expected. Then they are declared monsters because they have too much power, far more than anyone expected, and it's decided they must be destroyed for everyone else's good. And yes, some of their actions throughout the book prove that some of them are really monstrous. Ashok, specifically, is clearly an any means is justified by our ends kind of character, and some of the stuff he does is terrible. But the book never fully condemns him, nor does it condemn the actions of those who wanted to get rid of him, nor does it condemn those who want to side with him but say that he's going too far. There is so many layers of what is and is not monstrous here. And Malini may be one of the most interesting characters I've ever read. She openly admits to being manipulative, to showing different faces to different people as needed, to being objectively ruthless, which all makes her sound a bit monstrous. And also like a pretty common archetypical bad female character. Add in the fact that she's beautiful and born into a life of extreme privilege, and you're probably going, yeah, so she's just your average mean girl. But this book refuses to reduce her to that. It presents her in a way that is intensely understanding and empathetic. She is not at all unlikable. She never comes across as mean, and so often this sort of character is presented as sort of weak. Like, they have to manipulate people because that's the only way they'll ever achieve their goals, and inevitably their goals are shown as wrong-headed and just cruel. But Malini's manipulation is presented as a skill. Like, she is clearly thinking about how to use what she has. She's not lying to people because she's too pathetic to get her way any other way. She just knows exactly which truth to tell them to get shit done. And she does get shit done. And not all of it is done through manipulation. So because of that, she is more likable because we see her actively doing things herself. And also the fact that she is intensely honest about it. There's this really interesting scene where Pirya does call her on manipulating her, and Malini's response is basically just, yeah, I am, but I'm right. And she's just such a beautifully strong and fully committed to her goals kind of character, and her goals are not shown as bad. And yeah, some of her commitment, some of like how much she's driven does come across as slightly monstrous, while also making her seem pure in its own way. It also helps that she's constantly evaluating her own morality. She considers what is too far, had she crossed that line, what is she willing to sacrifice, how much of her humanity she is willing to sacrifice, who she is willing to sacrifice, and I just really find this a fascinating look at this character that is so much more dynamic and interesting than just, ooh, mean girl's manipulative, oh my god. But, while at the same time, sort of acknowledging the monstrousness of her. Which also plays into one of the other biggest themes in this book, women's power. I love that this book shows a lot of different ways for a woman to be powerful, stretching from like physically actively strong to, you know, able to manipulate magic, to just being manipulative people, to having the power of weakness. The book asks us to reevaluate things that are traditionally seen as feminine weaknesses and to question whether they are in fact strengths. There's of course Malini and another name, Bhumika's manipulations, but there's also Priya's kindness. Priya is constantly being told that she is weak and that her care and her kindness are her weakness. Her willingness to give people a second chance. All of this make her weak. And she's constantly being told she needs to let that go. She needs to move beyond it. And we are shown moments that, yeah, these things hurt her. Her kindness and her empathy end up causing her pain. But we are also shown ways that it helps her. There's another of those lines in this book that seems so simple at first glance, but has so much behind it. And hilariously, it's on the same page. Someone asked Priya if she will hurt them, and her response is, no, because I'm strong enough not to need to. And at that moment, it means she is physically strong enough. Like, she can physically overpower this person. She can hold them down without breaking a sweat. But that line is such a clear negation of all the people throughout the book who told her that she was being weak because she refused to hurt someone, or expected her to come across as weak for wanting to help people. And that line on its own would have won me over for this book. Like, I loved that line. But it's all part of this greater theme of what power women find when the most obvious kinds, political power, economic power, physical power, are denied to them. Bhumika is honestly the most interesting character when it comes to that, because she is in a position of power, but only because she is willing to make herself seem weak. And she is willing to play the roles that society tells her she has to, and just use them to her own end. And the story also goes in depth, like, exploring how society has traditionally ignored and devalued the kinds of powers and strengths that women are prone to having, and how those powers, too, can be monstrous. And I think the magic in the book really plays into this. The rot, it's a green, growing, plant-based magic plague. And earth and vines and growing things are almost always shown as soft and benevolent. But not here. The rot is destructive and horrific and painful. And the magic that the temple children have is the same kind of thing. All earth-based, growing flowers and vines and manipulating the soil. But we see this power do destructive things. There are very few moments in the book where the growing, like, green magic is shown as generative and kind. It is such an intense contrast to what we normally see. And to me, it read as another one of those elements of the book asking us to reevaluate things that are often seen as feminine and weak. Like, generally speaking, when you're looking at elemental magic, earth magic is shown as motherly, kind, and soft. And in this book, no, it is as strong and destructive as the more traditionally elemental fire magic. Though we see very little of it, but the implications are coming. And then there's the fire itself. The fire is tied to women, again, through the religion of the mothers, and specifically a mother's sacrifice, which is something that is usually associated with soft benevolence, and yet here is rather destructive. Mainly what I'm trying to say here is that this book just has a whole lot of interesting themes working together to create a complex network of concepts. But on the other side of that, I don't feel like this book ever sacrificed interesting characters or story in the name of theme. Like, the characters and story are what drive this book along. And also the characters are complex, they're likable and dislikable in turn, and explored so thoroughly that they feel very full and human. I also really like the romance in this book. It is a slow burn kind of romance, and in an interesting way, which is my favorite. Like, the characters both do definitely feel something instantly when they first see each other. But neither they nor we are sure what that feeling is. It's described as very intense, but they're not sure what's going on. And I love that there's more than just the usual do they like me or not kind of drama going on. There's a lot of more complex questions about each other's motivations going on that play into and counter the romance. And I even love the fact that about half the time when the romance is developing, I personally, as a reader, wasn't sure if it was two-sided or one-sided, even though we're spending a good bit of that time in one of the characters' heads, and I'm still not sure whether she likes the other character or not. And yes, this book did also include one of the most romantic moments I've ever read in a book. Like, I am not one that generally likes traditional romance elements, like knight in shining armor, nah, riding off on horseback, nah. But you give me two characters finally kissing for the first time under a waterfall in a dangerous but magic forest, and it turns out, yeah, I will squee in joy like a little girl for them. I would also like to say that in contrast to the Priory of the Orange Tree, I feel like this book did a much better job of creating the multiple interconnected religions at war with each other kind of idea. Like in Priory, one of my biggest problems with that book is that one of the religions was just 100% right and one was 100% wrong. And the truth just seemed to automatically win people over, and none of that felt realistic to me. But here we have at least 3 religions at least partially explored. There's the Mothers of the Flame, the worship of the Yaksa, and the nameless gods of the Allure. All 3 religions do interconnect. The Mothers were originally followers of the nameless gods until they sacrificed themselves to give the Empire the power to defeat the Yaksa. And the followers of the different religions are all aware, at least some, of how the other religions work. We are also given delicious hints that all 3 of the faiths have at least some real power and magic behind them, and presumably some truth. But there's also these lovely hints that there's something bigger and maybe even counter to what each faith believes that is actually happening. Also, none of these religions is shown as fully monstrous nor fully good. We are clearly meant to side with the Hiriana just because, we're seeing the book from mostly their perspective. They are the ones who are oppressed in this book, and most of our POV characters are actively fighting for these people's freedom. So, of course, we're going to assume that their religion is the one that we would, connect to the strongest. But even they seem to agree that the Yaksa were nowhere near a pure good in their world. Theirs is the religion that believes in basically abusing children into being strong enough to be priests. And when we finally do see a Yaksa, which, spoiler, we sort of vaguely do, in the proverbial flesh, it is described as clearly monstrous. The terms used to describe it, Pirya is awestruck, but it is far more the old meaning of awe, a good bit of terror and even horror mixed into the glory. And in contrast with the Mothers of the Flame, it's in their name that the Emperor burns women, but it's pretty clear that that is a corruption of the faith. The nameless gods do seem pretty innocuous at first glance, but they also do ask a lot of sacrifice in their followers. And this is all just a fascinating network of concepts and beliefs that may be contrasted to each other, may be working together in different places. But the important thing is it's not a black and white, one is good, one is bad, one is always right, one is always wrong. There's a lot of interplay between them, and this vibes that they actually make sense together. And I think that the whole concept of the interconnected religions is the thing that's going to get me picking up the sequel the quickest. Yeah, I'm interested in the characters, yes, I'm interested in the story, but I want to know more about how this universe works, how these different paranormal entities interact with each other. I really get the vibes that the clash between the religions is going to be a major part of the next book, and that makes me really excited. Really, the only thing that I want to talk about that's not in the positive column here is this book had a weird rhythm and structure. I got about 100 pages from the end and was super confused because it 110% felt like we were at the climax of the book. It felt like this book was practically over. And I kept glancing at it being like, how do I still have so much of this book left? We are at the climax. And then I read past it and there's this weird sort of skipping pattern, lots of little climaxes leading up to one more climaxy climax, and then there's another slightly less climaxy climax after that that's not soft enough to be declining action, but isn't, a climax. The last 100 pages or so sort of felt like it belonged in another book, but then looking back on it after having read the entire thing, yeah, no, this book would not have made sense if we stopped at that 100 page from the end mark. This is part of the book, but it's just a little bit messy. I think a large portion of this comes from the fact that there are several different subplots that resolve at different points in the book. The romance definitely has its climax about 100 pages from the end, and the rebels had their climax there too. But Malini has just started a major part of her character arc and won't climax for another 30 pages from the end. And then Rao, his climax is like 5 pages from the end, and we are still getting bits of all the other characters while these storylines are continuing. So we are jumping from one chapter that felt very climactic, to one that felt like a declining action, to one that felt like it was still rising action, to another that felt declining, to one that felt climactic, and then back to one that felt declining. And I'm not even ready to say that this is a problem. It's just odd. And it makes the last 100 pages feel a little bit uneven. Now, I am thinking that this is something that would be less noticeable if you were jumping right into the sequel directly from this one. So maybe this is one that buy both in tandem and read them immediately, and you won't notice this. But it is just weird, which also ends up working for me as a comp, because one of the things I've been worried about in my book from the beginning is that the rhythm feels a little bit off to me. But overall, I love this book. I find it fascinating. There's a lot of really interesting things going on, but it's also just an enjoyable story with enjoyable characters. I am probably going to be using it as a comp, and I really want to buy the next one so I can jump into it. But sadly, I have a buttload of books that I need to read before I can buy any more books.